which means they're made of Ire energy, and half of them are overtones, which are made of Manet energy. Manet energy with a big A has a quantum base of 33 1/3, and Ire has a quantum base of 11 2/3. The Manet is positive, the Ire is negative charge. All right, so we have one pulse creates 12 pulses, creates 144 sparks. Now these sparks go on to form chelons. This is where we're going to make a fire letter connection. All right, we've talked ages ago about fire letters and about how fire letters are in the DNA and they form the DNA template. Well, the fire letters connect directly to keys and chelons in this way. When you have, once the sparks are manufactured, sparks, a set of 3 chelona sparks forms a chelon. All right, a chelon is a fire letter. So a chelon forms a fire letter is formed. A chelon fire letter is formed. Up here we have the equivalents. Honey, can you pull this? Is it hot in here or is it just us? Okay, yeah, maybe we could open that door. Yeah, that would be a good idea. Thank you. Where's over there? Okay. Can we pull it over just a little bit more if there's anything over there? I don't know if there is. Yeah. Okay. We have chelona sparks form in the Jaffa. So it's down in here in the Jaffa layer is where? Jaffa is layer 3, so that's way down in here. This is where the sparks actually form, and then they expand out. All right. Now they form in the Jaffa. So chelona sparks form in the Jaffa. Chelon crystal fire letters form in the Adama. So the fire letters, which are groups of 3 sparks coming together to form a chelon, they pull in even closer, the second layer in. It's like layer number 2 of the Jaleesic layers. That's where the chelons form. And the chelontic lattice builds inside the partikey. You have the 12 Taran pulses with 12 chelona sparks each equals 144 chelona sparks, 72 positive, 72 negative, overtone and base tone, equals 48 chelon fire letters. One fire letter equals, 3 chelona sparks, or 1 chelon. Okay? So 4 fire letter sequences, dimensional bands. Now, fire letter sequence, a sequence of fire letters, dimensional bands, DNA strands. Okay? So when you see fire letter sequence, is the same thing as dimensional bands and same thing as DNA strands. All right? So when you have this out and you have 4 fire letter sequences form, which means 4 DNA strand templates. The keys are 4 DNA strand templates, and for 4 dimensional bands formed. 12 fire letters equals 1 fire letter sequence or dimensional band. So you have 12 fire letters, which are chelons, 12 chelons, right? Equals 1 fire letter sequence. And here we got 4 fire letter sequences, 48 chelons, or 48 chelon fire letters. Fire letters become important later when we see the charts with the numbers because you have an idea of, all right, we're generating keys. What do they have to do with those things we used to talk about that are fire letters? They have all sorts of things to do with them because you can you calculate the amount of quantum a set of keys has in using fire letters, as far as, there are this many fire letters in this many keys. The key stuff gets really wild when we get into a set of 6 tachyon cycles. If we remember, there is a set of 12 harmonic key cycles, these cycles, in 1 tachyon cycle. And then there are 6 full tachyon cycles in what's called a natural 6 cycle that is actually a 12 cycle because it has its counter cycle that goes really fast right at the end. So we'll look at those a little bit. But it all starts here with the pulsing of the Taran light seed and the formation of the first set of 144 sparks in the partikey. Next one, please. And that is referred to as the chelontic lattice within the partikey. Now, from that point where we had 144 sparks, the partikey and chelontic lattice contract into the Jaffa. They actually pull in. So once all of the 144 sparks came out and made their chelons and formed the chelontic lattice, then the chelontic lattice and the partikey contract into the Jaffa, which is layer 3, contract into down here. And then the Adama, which is layer 2, protosparks, which has to do with the protogel that it is made out of, the Jeleasic state. The Adama protosparks fire the cheilontic lattice in the Jaffa. Okay, so the cheilontic lattice pulls in to level 3, and then the Adama sparks it. This level sends some of its Jeleasic units, and it sparks that and creates activation of the original cheilontic lattice, okay, in the Jaffa. Then the cheilon bonds release, which are those links between sets of three sparks. So they release, and bipolar harmonic keys form in the Ina Ka. So in here, the cheilonic lattice gets pulled in to the center, and the Adama releases energy into that from level 2 to level 3, and it releases the cheilon structure, or the crystalline structure, and it allows the sparks to go outward, and they go outward into a new configuration, which is a set, the 144 sparks form from a set of 12 harmonic keys. A harmonic key has one set of overtone sparks, 6 overtone sparks. And remember, overtones have a base of 33 1/3 positive Mane, and a set of bass tone sparks that are 11 2/3 negative charge, Ire. So you have an overtone and a bass tone that forms one harmonic key. But there's a lot of quantum difference between these. One is quite big as far as the quantum it holds. So you'd have 33 1/3 times 6 would be that. You'd have 11 2/3 times 6 as far as the quantum of that. So the next thing that happens is they go through the resolution of the keys, where they're resolving their quantum imbalance. All right, next one, please. Harmonic key resolution. This is where we end up with harmonic keys turning into kasha keys and crystal keys with jewels and the beginning of the lores, the K-lores. All right, I'm not going to read all of the bits because there's all sorts of dynamics that happen through this process. But what the main thing that happens is the crystal keys, first of all, the quantum redistribution, key resolution, and the kasha keys. The kasha keys are formed by, and I went over this yesterday briefly, that the kasha key, which are these, okay, and they're in the ka layer, okay. So this would be layer 9, which is ka. That's the ka layer, layer 9. All right. The 12 harmonic keys turn into these configurations, 12 of these configurations. And how that happens is this, where you have the 6 33 1/3 positive Mane sparks. They deliver some of their quantum, or give up some of their quantum, an equal amount to the 11 2/3 negative bass tone Ire sparks. These sparks are down into the ma level, I believe. Yeah, I don't have these marked on here, but later I do. So you have these larger sparks giving to these sparks an equal amount to these sparks. So you have each one of these sparks losing 11 2/3 quantum of Mane. Now we'll see later how this gets interesting, because this is where we end up with manas as opposed to manes. Manas and pranas come out of this whole process. All right? So we have this quantum resolution. When the overtone key gives up part of its quantum to the bass tone key, it ends up a set of 6 sparks that change their configuration from this, which is actually the configuration of the 636, I believe, of the natural light seed. It's the Gathara grid without the middle points in it, right? You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but that's the 2 endpoints. It changes configuration to a natural pentagram within a circle. That is the natural signature for that. 1 spark in the center and 5 on the outside. So it's still a 6-spark cluster, but these sparks now have a quantum that is 33 1/3 minus 11 2/3, which is 21 2/3. Still positive charge. So you have 21 2/3 times 6 is the quantum of energy held in this now, and it is called the mana. All right, so this is the mana key. The kasha key is the mana key. It becomes called the kasha key later during the ordination process, when at the center spark pulls in an equal quantum of an Adore spark called the kasha, negative charge, from the Adore side. But instead of just calling it the kaki because it sounded funny, they refer to it as the kasha ki because it holds the kasha. Okay, but it is not itself the kasha. It holds the kasha. It is a mana ki that holds the kasha. All right. So once the kasha ki forms by giving up part of its quantum to the bass tone key, an interesting thing happens. What happens to that 11 2/3 times 6 positive quantum when it bonds to the bass tones and it forms its own little template, but if you have the bass tone going on vertical axis, this is going on the horizontal axis, all right? And they merge. This one ends up being called the jala. It's actually called the jala. And this one becomes the shala. So when these come together, they form a bonded thing called a crystal key. And that goes into the ma layer, which is layer 8. So we have the ka, ma. So the key shifted from here into the bass tones dropping in fully into the ma layer, and the overtones the overtone differential. They call it the overtone differential key because it's the difference between the quantum of it is the difference between the the original bass tone and overtone. So it's a differential key, the mana key. So we end up with the jala and with a positive charge, and the bass tone with the negative charge ire. This is still made, the jala is still made of the ka energy that was given from what was originally the ka mana energy from this level. So it is still mana, or mana energy, but of a lesser quantum. This forms the crystal key. And these all they all go into key resolution at the same time. And this begins a process of where keys can be stored for activation at a later time. I think I got it. Right. Okay. Next one, please. Well, I'm getting down to the last layer here. I'm not going to be able to take anything else off after this one. Right. Okay. Now. Yeah. Now, this was where we jumped past several stages to get to, after a bunch of harmonic key cycles. What we saw before, the graph before, was what takes place during one harmonic key cycle with a set of 12 keys. There are, after 12 harmonic key cycles, where you have 144 harmonic keys manufactured and gone into storage, then you go into what's called a tachyon cycle, where those keys become tachyons. So every set of 12 harmonic keys moves into the ta layer, which is layer 7, moves into the ta layer and bonds to a hydros unit, or a hydrogen bond. It's actually a hydrogen bond, and it forms a set of 12 keys around a hydrogen bomb, and that bond forms a tachyon, one tachyon. So you have 12 sets of 12 keys form 12 tachyons. All right, so that's how tachyons form. And it's tachyons that build up and then go through what is called a flash point, where they transmute through interactions between the different states and gels and the vibration and oscillation of those in the Ta field. It creates a reaction, set of reactions within the Jalizic layers of the party key that culminates in activation of the sets of keys that are stored in the tachyons, and activation of the Ta layer as a full tachyon field, which is a superluminal field. And at a certain point called 0 point or flash point, the entire party key and all its contents and the taran itself, the entire light cluster or light cell cluster that formed these parts inside of itself, the whole thing disappears into source. It literally goes back through creation point into God source. And then it replicates the quantum it has there by some very interesting ratios, as we'll see a little bit of as we get to the new graphs. And then rebirths back out. When the taran rebirths back out, it births out a replica of, it's a ×2 replica, they call it, of what's called the dyad, the next light cell cluster. But it also rebirths itself back out, and its keys, the keys that it had fired during the process, had also, even though they were the energy that gave the thrust to go back through creation point door and was used in that way, that energy is also replicated. And when the Tauren comes back out and rebirths as the dyad is birthing, the keys are compressed and condensed, and they come back out as a set of sets of aurora fire crystals. So there are sets of aurora fire crystals that generate every time the Tauren goes in and goes into source on a flashpoint. In a set, that would be one tachyon cycle would end with a flashpoint. Now, because each of these units, as we've seen in the Starborn cycle charts, are embedded in each other. You have the Tauren, and then around that you have the dyad, and around that you have the myad, around that you have the monad. When, say, the dyad reaches the end of its tachyon cycle and it's time for it to do flashpoint, it's going to pull the Tauren back in with it again, right? So the Tauren goes back in with the dyad, and then there's this whole replication factor. The Tauren comes back out again. So the Tauren is the one, because it's the first one to come out. It goes in every time the other ones go in. And every time there's a replication factor that happens with the crystal keys inside. So there are these little opalized, or they call them opalized aurora keys, crystals that form inside of the Tauren, but also inside of the partakey of every one of the Starborn clusters. And for every one of the Starborn clusters, you have one partakey in the Tauren. When the Tauren does its replication cycle in flashpoint and comes back out as a dyad, the dyad has two partakey. The myad, the next one to come out, has three partakey. So the monad has four partakey, the emery has five partakey, right? It goes like that all the way through. So the partakey are replicating. Now, certain portions of the cell structure replicate. The replication stuff was what was driving me crazy today, trying to track which, all right, this goes in, that comes out, that has that many of these replicated ×2, that replicated, that didn't, these went here, that replicated here. It was just, it's brutal. But eventually there will be a fully complete chart to show you what the full numbers are on that. But it's enough if you understand that at the end of one tachyon cycle, or one set of 12 harmonic key cycles, you have one flashpoint tachyon, a tachyon cycle. And in a full round, you have 6 tachyon cycles, and a 7th, what is called the Adashai cycle, and an 8th, what is called the Adashi cycle, where you actually pop off into the Adore side and pick up the Adore keys, and then come back out at the same 0 point and able to make the shift to the next round. When we get into larger planetary cycles of tachyon building, this plugs right in to the yugas. We've talked about the Uego cycles and then the larger yuga cycles, Iyuga, Uyugha. The Iyuga cycles, there are 4 Iyuga cycles. They correspond with the 4 sets of 12 cycles, or 6 + 6 cycles that these are. So we're finally finding out more, we're finding out more about, we would always get to Axis 9 and then go, okay, I know something happens now, we go on to the next cycle, but what is the structure? What is the next level of structure? It's a repeat of that one, but there's more, because we've also found out in this workshop about the Oerta clouds. Now, the Oerta clouds have portions of ionized keys, the replica keys, that every time one goes in with the ones in front of it, it keeps replicating, it will hold the first set of its own keys from its own flashpoint as jewels, or its first replica as the jewels inside, which are the Aurora fire crystal keys holding the jewels. And any replicas after that, it ionizes and turns into clouds that hold a certain amount of fire letter content that was the fire letter quotient of the keys. And because each one of those, with the Taran being the one that pops in and out most, that goes through flashpoint with the others, more than any of the other ones that come later, it has the most bands around it. Oort clouds, the Oorta clouds, they're called Oorta, because an Oor, which is a 12th of an is a measurement of light and radiation. And the Oort clouds are radiation clouds that are naturally formed around the body. And these are the things that actually, they haven't even gotten to explaining how, once the Oorta clouds, they go outside of the unit that formed them, of the cluster of light cells that formed them, outside the particle and outside the unit itself. They become the externalization of matter, or the outpicturing, the substance from which are subatomic particles and particle waves and electromagnetic waves that form particle waves are born from. So it's quite an amazing process when we understand that this is how we come all the way back down here, and finally we end up, all right, we're walking around in a body, and now we're going to find out in a little while the fact that we have these keys, and we're made of them. Our skin represents one layer where these keys are stored. Our bone represents another layer, and our blood plasma represents another layer. Connected with the blood plasma, this stuff is also connected. We didn't get into the reproduction aspects of it in this workshop, but it's also connected with the egg and the sperm and what happens when conception occurs. They'll probably give us that at some point, but not right now. It was more important to do the Kama Sutra in this workshop. So anyway, it's all connected to all of these things that might seem out there far away and big and like where the cosmos was created. It's also how all of us were created. When it comes to the planetary body, the planet doesn't have bones, but it has stone. All right? So we have, actually, the skin of the planet is the surface, the crust. The bone of the planet would be the mantle level. And the blood plasma, I believe, has to do with the magma. They didn't tell me exactly yet on that one, but I think it has to do with lava. And just like we have, blood, planet has lava, that kind of thing. So when we are talking about activating keys, it all of a sudden becomes very, very personal. And like, whoa, right in your face all of a sudden, like, wow, you mean my skin and my bones and my blood plasma? And the planet's rocks and lava? Yeah. So all of these key activations that we're going through, when we start to get sensations in the body, sometimes you'll get them, sometimes it'll be 6 weeks after a workshop when it starts to kick in enough to feel it, right? But these are not theoretical. These are not meditation techniques that are out there and like, you imagine you're doing something. Whether you imagine it or not, if these things activate in your body, they are doing something because you were made of these keys and you're made of these units. So it's exciting that we're finally getting to where all of the wonderful, esoteric, great Christian metaphysical stuff we've been working with for all these years finally comes right down to home, where it's right in your skin. Did you ever get those confirmation bristles, by the way? Some people get those a lot, where if somebody's talking to you about something and you're saying, I think it might have been that, and it's like you have a direct hit. Like if you were right, it's like a psychic sense, where all of a sudden the hairs on your arms will stand up. Like, oh, yep, that's a yes, right? Or that's a maybe, they're only at 45 degrees. That kind of thing, right? Or you might get a bristle, or sometimes you'll get it in response to a fear response. If there's something around and you don't realize it here with your conscious mind, all of a sudden your body recognizes it. These crystals, these skin crystals, are actually reacting. There's a whole set of communication that's taking place between your skin crystals, your bone crystals, and your blood crystals. And even if you're not paying attention, your body's saying, yo, something's up, watch your fields, right? That kind of thing. So it's also when we begin activating and working with the prana breaths and things to get these crystals activated, it's also something you can do to sensitize. You can use these techniques to sensitize your skin. When you bring that into lovemaking with a significant other, when you learn to move, sometimes slower, with lighter touch, so you can actually begin to directly stimulate the skin crystals, right? Feather touch to start, slow feather touch. And you build. You can create such an electric charge without even touching. If you do that first before you touch, imagine what it might feel like when you do. There are little things about working with these technologies that can be very practical for a person on a 3D level that's having a 3D life. You know, you can actually get an idea of what it means to stimulate the skin crystals that we'll talk about more in a minute. If you take one little spot, like a sensitive spot on your hand or on the inside of your wrist where the skin is quite sensitive, and if you just